I turned from Mr. L and Mareface just as Rimon landed on my little piece of floating island. "Rimon, I'm so glad to see you. Where have you been?" I cried, hugging him. "I've been all around here," he answered in his ever-cheerful voice. "Did I hurt you when I dropped you? I'm sorry I did." "That's okay. My ankle hurt, but only for a week, 'cause God healed it after I begged him to. See, I was stuck with this snap pea lady, and she was driving me insane. Snapping peas, so I lit out on a ship, 'cause I heard you was around here, but then we landed on one of those bloated people islands, and it was all bad and sick and smelly, and everybody died, and I stubbed my toe." I turned from Mr. L and Mareface just as Rimon landed on my little piece of floating island. "Rimon, I'm so glad to see..." I turned from Mr. L and Mareface just as Rimon landed on my little piece of floating island. "Rimon, I'm so glad to see you. Where have you been?" I cried, hugging him. "I've been all around here," he answered in his ever-cheerful voice. "Did I hurt you when I dropped you? I'm sorry I did." "That's okay. My ankle hurt, but only for a week, 'cause God healed it after I begged him to. See, I was stuck with this snap pea lady, and she was driving me insane, snapping peas, so I lit out on a ship, 'cause I heard you was around here. But then we landed on one of those bloated people islands, and it was all bad and sick and smelly, and everybody died, and I stubbed my toe." "Oh no," he said, still cheerfully. "I'm glad you got off. How'd you get off?" "The island came apart 'fore they turned, so I got to whack a bunch of them by locking them in this icky house. I'm practically an expert at hurting those nutcases now," I bragged, quite proud of my ability to not die or get eaten by raging lunatics. "Wow, soon enough you'll be just like my cousin Dilbert, 'cause he herds snakes, and never gets bit. But that sure was a night-shading time you had. By the way, who are these people?" "Oh, this is Mr. Ellington and Marina Mayer of Coltonhoff. I met 'em on the ship. Go ahead and shake hands. They don't got the lice." Rimon, assured of that, came forward and shook hands, though my two companions seemed about forgetful on how to greet a body civil. Their mouths were open and their hands were near limp and hesitating as they shook Rimon's bone and feathers hand. "Don't know why. Maybe it's a custom." "Are you a bird?" Marina gasped out. No, certainly not. I am very different. I am not at all that species. I am a crow." Marina and Mr. L looked at each other, and Rimon turned back to me. "Dr. B and the kids are a few flaps over there," pointing. "Do you want me to go tell 'em to pick you up?" "Yeah, that'll be right felicitous. How are they all doing?" "Fine, still headed to the mainland." "What's taking them so long?" "Well, they docked at this one place for a while, about a month, but Dr. B really wants to get to the mainland, and none of the kids want to leave him, so they set out again. They got real sailors with them this time, though." "That's good. They can probably read those squiggly line papers." "Yeah, can you tell them to swing by here?" "Sure thing. Be back in a rustle." So saying, Rimon took to the sky and soon was out of sight. Mr. L asked me who Dr. B was, so I explained the whole night-shading story. "So you did know everything about what was going on with Gumbar Tea," Marina exclaimed when I got to the avocados explosions part. "We've been over that already," I replied, rolling my eyes. I went on with my blooming story, and we were soon up to speed. "I have a cousin on the mainland. It would be nice to see him," said Mr. L. "What about your wife? Are you going to go see her?" Marina asked, gesturing to his left hand. He looked at this shiny thingy around one of his fingers. "I'm afraid I can't reach her anymore," he said, all quietly. "Why not?" I asked, but then Marina elbowed me for some reason and started asking Mr. L about something else. I shrugged to myself and turned around to see if Rimon was coming back yet. Bread number 1 peeped out the ocean all subtly, so I crept over and leaned down to it, glancing back to make sure my two companions were distracted. "What is it, darling?" I whispered. The bread nodded its peepers back behind us. I looked, gulped, and almost lost my lunch. There was another chunko island floating towards us, and there was an Olympic monster on it. "What on earth is that?" Mr. L exclaimed, catching sight of it too. "Death, and it smells like avocados," I answered. "Can it get to us?" Marina exclaimed. "What are we going to do?" "Well, it's not like it can paddle. It can't get wet," I pointed out. The monster was pacing the island piece, watching us. We stared back. Suddenly, it gripped the little tree that was growing on its island chunk, ripped it out, and started using it to paddle. "Ah!" went up our collective scream. We dive-bombed for the paddles and started whipping the water like nobody's business. "Push, Breads, push!" I yelled. "Here, Reverie, paddle like this," Mr. L called. "We have to do it together." His calm management was actually very helpful. With the Breads pushing, Yogurt was helping too. And us paddling, we were managing to stay ahead of the creature. I knew the distance they could jump, and I fervently prayed we'd stay far from that distance. Minutes passed, we were ahead, but we couldn't lose it. It began to become clear that we weren't going to outlast it in stamina. We're going to have to kill it, swamp it, and send it to the Lord, I declared over all the splashing, pushing, and huffing. Are you certain the water will do it? Mr. L asked, hesitant. Affirmative, I answered, proud of myself for sounding so civilized, even in such a situation. We formed a plan, then stopped rowing. We filled the one bucket and our pan with nice and deadly seawater. I nodded to the Breads, and they, understanding, got ready to splash. "You girls get to the edge, slip into the water the moment it jumps," Mr. L instructed. The monster got closer with alarming speed. Yogurt crept out of the water and pressed against my leg. Scared, I guess. 20 feet away it leapt, its Olympic strength sending it impossibly high and fast. Mr. L's plan stunk, 'cause it was jumping right over him and heading straight for me. For an instant, I saw myself reflected in its blood-hungry eyes. Then a flash of white, a sudden rush, and the air exploded green with that sickening stench of fresh avocados. I landed in the water, but Bread number 2 bounced me right back to the island. "Reverie, are you okay?" Marina screamed in my ear, smacking my back. "I'm cough. Fine, get away from me." It was that white blob. It saved you," Mr. L exclaimed, pointing to Yogurt, who was lying and looking deflated. "Yogurt!" I rushed to her. "Yogurt, are you all right?" I scooped up the poor fermented milk blotch. The Breads came and huddled up around us. Yogurt blinked drowsily, looked up at me, then fell back and went limp. I gaped. How could I lose Yogurt? "Oh, Yogurt, you're so young to go. You just came out the milk. Don't go, Yogurt." I lowered my head, weeping. All of a sudden, I felt a nudge from Bread number 4. I looked at her, then back at Yogurt. I leaned close to Yogurt, and she suddenly popped up and back to life. "Ah, Yogurt, are you good? Are you bloomin'?" Yogurt bounced, eyeballs blinking brightly. "Oh, thank heavens." I was so relieved. Reverie?" Marina cleared her throat. "What is going on here?" Mr. L inquired, looking wonderfully confused. "What are these things?" "Oh," I stood up, letting go of Yogurt. "This is Yogurt, and these are the Breads. That terrible pea lady, you know, Meredith, she made me make 'em, and they's living for some reason. I don't know, they got eyes after I mixed them together." Marina and Mr. L stared at me for a couple of seconds. "That is so strange," Marina finally said. "Is it, though?" I rejoined. "Well, anyways, now that Mr. Bad Avocado Smell is dead and buried, I hope Rimon gets back soon. I gotta tell him about how civilized I sounded." "Half the time, I have no idea what you were talking about," Marina told me, cracking a smile. We waited around a bit more, but instead of Rimon, we got wind. It set in as the sun began to go down. "Rimon won't be able to get back to us now, nor the ship neither," I said glumly. "It's all right, it'll give us another reprieve soon enough, and who knows, we might even be south of them by now. We traveled quite a ways when we were paddling," Mr. L pointed out, trying to be reassuring. "Hey, I see something," Marina hesitantly said, pointing far to the northeast. There was a dark blob on the horizon. "Must be another piece of island," I slowly claimed. We all watched, engrossed, for a few minutes. "It's getting bigger," I said, at last. "The wind's blowing both of us, but that has more mass to it than we do. Trees and rocks, more things for the wind to push against," Mr. L carefully explained. "Oh no, it's going to catch up to us," Marina wailed. "Ah, great," I groaned. "Wait, maybe we can make one of those big flappy crisp things like the boats have. I got this excruciatingly heavy piece of stuff like that for a shelter making because I'm civilized. We could use that." I dug around in my pile of supplies I'd purloined from Gumbar Tea. I also still had that satchel from Meredith. Why do you have a teddy bear? Marina said, dangling it by one leg. Don't touch that, I snatched it from her. So that's what it's called, I murmured to myself, hiding the prize away. Well, what about all this glass stuff? What were you gonna do with it? Oh, that's for Rimon. He loves anything shiny. You should see his room back home. Where do you live exactly, Reverie? Mr. L inquired. Way over there. I waved my hand in a northerly direction. I pulled out the canvas. Marina and I helped Mr. L rig up the canvas to a crosspiece of limbs he hastily put together. Then we put it into place and held it while he drove the crosspiece into the ground with the help of a hammer I'd brought. After that, we all sat down to eat some beans. Are you part bird too, Reverie? Marina asked me. No, what do you mean too? Well, Rimon is, isn't he? No, he told you he's a crow. Though I think he's more like a pigeon, I said with a giggle. I thought for a moment, then added, my great-grandmother married a crow. Is that why you said you would marry him? Mr. L asked kindly. Marrying a crow is a very good thing. You know, I was 3 when we found him, and it was the best day for us so far. I remember it still. How did you find him? Marina asked, looking amused for some reason. He was at the base of the Hollows Mountain, of course. He was just a little chick because he'd fallen out the nest. I took a bite of beans. The crows, you know, live up there. When Rimon was big enough, he flew back to him. They were bloomin' happy to see him. They must have looked everywhere for him, Marina said, sympathizing. But wouldn't they know he's only just down the mountain? Mr. L asked. I cocked my head, thinking on what Rimon had told me at the time. They won't come down the mountain. They're very superstitious, he said. They regard on the mountain and down the mountain on our side as 2 different realities. Since Rimon fell out the nest and ended up on our side, then came back to them, they see him as having the ability to pass through realities, so he can go back and forth while they would never dare. Mr. L and Marina seemed to need to chew on that for a bit, along with the tough beans. Meanwhile, I was just thinking about the apples we grew at home. Morning came with a calm, and I felt hope once more. As we were finishing breakfast, the breads and yogurt came popping out the ocean and huddled up to me. What's wrong? I asked, immediately looking all around for a monster while Mr. L and Marina did the same. To my right, the sea spurted all of a sudden, and out came the forehead of a giant, slimy blob. Your cousin? I asked Yogurt, and she shoved me. It's a giant squid, Mr. L informed us. Its eye looked at us benignly. Is it going to? Marina said, hesitatingly. I don't think so. It's just passing by, Mr. L replied. The head of it was as big as a table, but it appeared real gentle. It was next to us for another moment or two, then, without much of a goodbye, it disappeared back into the rolling ocean. Within a few moments of that, Rimon arrived. Seeds and sticks, you guys drifted far. The ship's behind you now. Let me go get 'em to swing over here. They've been anchored waiting for you. Rimon did just that, and soon enough the ship was beside us. Hi, Dr. Brockovic, I called out, waving. A top of the morning to you, Miss Reverie. We'll have you aboard in no time. Thanks, Dr. B. The ship's newly hired sailors threw out lines, which Mr. L and we got pulled in on. Once we were snug against the side of them, they tied us off and started hauling aboard our provisions and us. Rimon came back aboard, looking happily at a shiny bauble I'd got at Sally's. It was her beloved uncle's priceless glass eye. And I came aboard carrying my teddy bear in one arm, don't mention it, and a can of beans in the other. Introductions and catching up carried on forthwith. I'm so civil. Just before the sailors were going to cut our island loose, I peeped over the side and tried to coax the breads and yogurt up to meet everyone. With all the weird things we'd been through, I was sure nobody would bat an eye, even at the bread's extra big eyes. Come on up, darlings. You don't have to be shy. A little more coaxing, and they came squeaking up the side of the ship. These are the breads, and this is yogurt, I introduced them, holding the latter. My goodness, Dr. B said, looking them over careful-like. Where'd you get 'em? Little Marie asked. Well, I was trying to make bread, and they just happened, I explained with a shrug. Do you want to see 'em drink? It looks really funny. Yeah, the kids all agreed, so we sat down with the little creatures and a bowl. Not long later, that wicked wind kicked up with ferocity. If something wasn't tied down, including me, it was going across the deck and into lights out. The ship bobbed, moaned, and creaked. While Dr. B worked on keeping the kids' spirits up by singing, Rimon and I went into the dead captain's room to look at the squiggly maps. "Do you know where we are, Rimon?" Doc said, "Right here." Rimon pointed a feather at the opposite place. "Okay, so where's home?" "That one's a little trickier because it's not marked on the map. Through my flying, I can about tell it's right around here." He put a little mark on the map. "The sailors all say nothing's there, but I know it is." "Are we going to be able to find him when we go all the way round?" "Yeah, I'll be able to tell easy once we get close." He spoke with confidence, setting my mind at ease. The ship was still a-rolling and a-pitching, and all of a sudden a bottle fell down from somewhere and smashed. Peeking over the table at it, I saw something suspicious, so I went over there. "Hey, this bottle was a bold-faced lie. It ain't got no liquid. It's just had paper in it." "Cool, it must be a smuggler's note or something," Rimon said, flitting over. "It's addressed to a Tessa Vane cloak." "Got the coordinates and everything," I pointed out. "That's on the mainland. We can send it when we get there," Rimon said. "But it's got no return address." "Let's read it," I proposed. "No, you can't read someone else's papers. 'Member there's that saying, someone's pen and papers is theirs to own, not to another ever shown." "Ah, phooey on that," I waved my hand. "If it's a smuggler's note like you said, then they've already thwarted the law." "What if it's a love letter?" Rimon said with sudden inspiration. "Ah, puke. Yeah, we'll just send it when we get there," I said, completely abandoning the idea of opening it and just tucking it away for now. The next day we went out on deck to find it livable, though still blowing. "Why can't we see anything?" little Fanny complained. "Fog'll burn off once the sun gets up further," one of the sailors called down from his place up in the ropes. I went over to the rail and sure enough couldn't see squat. I turned back round and leaned against it. I was listening to Dr. B's long-winded explaino of fog. We at home called it soup. When I heard a big bump, which was an Olympic avocado monster jumping up on the rail behind me. Rimon immediately went after it and knocked it backwards, but its claw was in my dress, so it pulled me too. All three of us went over the side. Rimon automatically braked and delayed his momentum into the water, but I was right with the monster when it hit and blew. The force of its pop knocked me unconscious, so I sank like a rock. While Rimon desperately tried to save my corpse from drowning, those on the ship had to deal with the second monster. It landed on the rail, gave its ghastly howl, and went at the first person it saw, which was Dr. B, whose life was currently flashing before his eyes. However, a sailor cut short his trip to eternity by deftly throwing a knife into the monster's skull. It shrieked, pulled the knife out, pulling some brimstone, and went at the mast where the sailor was hanging. It leapt for him, but he swung out the way while another sailor planted his boots into its spine. That almost sent it swiping out to sea, but it caught up in the rigging. It twisted in the ropes and nearly chomped down on the first sailor, who was unfortunately swinging back the wrong way, but in stretching for him, it got its finger jammed in a pulley. The moment of distraction was enough. A sailor slit the ropes holding the pulley aloft, and the monster fell neat and tidy down in the hatch, which, thanks to the hard winds of yesterday, had a foot of water in it. Down it went, up came the pop, and out came the cheers, until Rimon hauled my sodden self back onto the deck with a flop. Dr. B rushed right over, checked for breathing, and started doing chest palpitations. 30 seconds in, I coughed up the whole ocean and sat up very soggy. Rimon hugged me, blubbering hopelessly, and everyone else cheered. I'm fine, get away from me," I exclaimed. "She's fine," Dr. B yelled out, and everyone cheered again. I spent the rest of the day squeezing the water out of my limbs and suffering a horrid headache. I hated to mention it, but by the night I wasn't so good. The salt in myself was grating and painful, and with the various cuts and crushings I'd gotten on Gumbar tea, and now the scratch the monster had just given me, I was getting to be a sorry corpse. I could have used a good grave right about then. I got up out of the cupboard I liked to sleep in and went down the little stairway to where Rimon was roosting. I noticed the sailors were all far away from him. Their rope bed thingies were clear across the hold. Anyways, I slapped his wing and he peeped out all drowsily. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a sleepy low chirp. This salt's driving me down the tree," I whispered back. "You think there is any dirt on the ship?" He scratched his nose with its talons. "There's this white powder, cook called it flour, big barrels of it down below. You want to use that? Well, it's worth a lay-in, I said, all low. Rimon and I went down into the deep back storeroom, and he wrenched the cover off one of the barrels. I put my hand in the white substance. Excellent, excellent. Kinda dry, but it will be okay. I got up on the rim, enough to get the salt out at least. Rimon yawned and spoke while rubbing his eyes. You'll be up about a day? Uh-huh. I stepped in and started wiggling down in. I'll be up maybe before breakfast. Can you open a water barrel for me, please? Sure thing. Ah, Rimon, you the best, I said, and then fully submerged. When I popped out just before breakfast, I and my clothes was white as a dead and gone ghost, but a little soak and fresh water got me most back to me own color. There's nothing better than that fresh corpse feeling. After breakfast, we had a crisp mid-morning and the sight of two lands, the mainland and that big old chunk of fallen gumbar tea Mr. L. Marina and I had sighted earlier. But who cared about that? We were hours away from dry, unsullied dirt. We'll be in by evening, the first mate announced. We'll have to deliver that letter, then we can start on our way around, I said to Rimon excitedly. Yeah, I can't wait to get home, he replied with enthusiasm. Me too, I emphatically declared. As we were starting to get close to the mainland, something occurred to Marina. Wait a minute. We're gonna hit the mainland soon, right? But isn't that, she pointed at the chunk behind us, going to hit it too? We all stared at the chunk, the mysterious island chunk that may or may not be carrying a bush load of gold medal athletic monsters hungry for tender living flesh. There was no doubt it would hit the mainland. The wind was blowing it as surely as it was blowing us. Oh, great, I said sarcastically. The end, possibly.